the current iteration of what Stephen A is doing is interesting to me in terms of the politics stuff, because it's in part because of the way the technology treats the stuff that he puts out. So on my Twitter feed, for example, look, Twitter is like a zombie neighborhood now. So I recognize it's not necessarily the most reflective algorithm, but I feel this way also about like some of the other places that I go or whatever. But when I see Stephen A's political commentary, it is sent to me always from the same account.
Yep.
And it is always, and not an account I follow. I'm on the For You tab, because I think the people ask, why do you use the For You tab versus the Following tab? Because after all these years, all of us are tired of hearing from the people that we've been hearing from all this time. You have the people I know, you have nothing new that I want to hear if you're not going to call me on the phone and talk to me about it, right? So for you, kind of gives you a little something else, right? So I've wind up over there. It is always something that the algorithm clearly knows runs counter to my personal politics. And it is always from an account from somebody who works for the Daily Caller. That the point of that is to engage me in something that I will hate, because the data has shown that people do this phenomenon. This is nasty. Taste this, right?
Yeah.
That's what gets people really, really charged up, is that saying things that people don't like. But everything is something that somebody doesn't like, right? So for all I know, my stuff bounces around in all these worlds of people who can't stand me. So like back in the day when I was a little bit more prominent doing these things, if the algorithm existed as it did, I'd have been really famous with people I hate, because that's what gets the actual factual engagement in this point. And so, the medium is the message, right? That idea that you see brought up, I forget the gentleman who said it at first, but Neil Postman's books mentioned that a lot. The medium has affected us so much in what really works and what really breaks through. But I don't think any of us are intentionally making content that makes people mad. It just winds up happening and you wind up being confused. But then you look up and that's what goes.
Bomani Jones, speaking with Andrew Marchand, gave his take on Stephen A. Smith's political content.
How do the Democrats look when they now try to attack Trump because they say he pays no attention to the facts? How do they look now when they say he doesn't provide leadership? How do they sound now when they accuse him of lawlessness? I mean, at some point in time, we just have to give the man credit. He's shrewd as hell. He really is. I mean, he is giving the Democratic Party lessons. Lessons. I mean, school is in session on how to manipulate minds and coax folks into thinking along the lines of his way of thinking. You can't sit up there and talk about how everything is partisan when the man sits up there and lets you off the hook and you're on the opposite party. Now, granted, that same representative, Queller, was the same guy that spoke out against the Biden administration when it came to immigration issues in our borders. So again, that falls in line with Trump, and we get that part, but he's still a Democrat.
Because not only can he not pronounce Henry Cuellar, he believes the disgraced congressman who railroaded Jessica Cisneros is a Dem through and through. Stephen A. is showing himself once again. However, on ESPN as a whole,
it's right around this time 8 years ago that Skipper left and Jimmy wound up taking over. I have different relationships with both of them. I like both of them. And I think I talked about this the last time I was here. The biggest difference is that Skipper's a content guy, and Skipper had a vision for content. Jimmy, as most of us understand it, job one was, can you tighten up this relationship with the NFL, please? Because John Skipper did not, that's not something he found to be interesting necessarily. Yep. Jimmy tightened up all of those things, right? Like, this is now a company where the content vision is live events, at least in theory. Like, that was what my expectation would be, especially when you put Burt Magnus in charge of content. And I want to be clear, I've never met Burke once in my life. He could walk in here right now and I would have no idea who he was. But the reason is that when I worked there, his job was negotiating contracts with the leagues.
Yep.
Like, it never dawned on me that somebody who did that job would ever become the content czar at a place like that. And from where I sit, I don't see the vision for the content.
At the beginning of this clip, he was talking about the differences between John Skipper, the former ESPN president, and Jimmy Pitaro, the current.
They used to be kind of like MTV in the 80s. And they were notorious for this in the sense that they weren't paying people a whole lot of money because they felt like we make stars.
Yep.
Right? Like, you want more money, you go ahead, we'll get somebody else. Like, think about what happened with Dan Patrick, which I guess is now probably like 15 years ago.
And more than that, yeah.
Yeah, like, we'll go find another one of you. Is not that big a deal. They can't do that anymore. Like, the idea that Stephen A. Smith makes $20 million a year would have been ridiculous not that long ago. They would have told him or anybody else, oh, we'll just go find another of you. No, they don't think they can do that anymore. And the people that they're bringing on that are new, I'll say McAfee for purposes of this discussion counts as new. You mentioned the Bussin' with the Boys guys that now come on. It's all people who already have their own thing somewhere else. They're out of ideas, or at the very least, nobody is in the business of coming up with new ideas.
This is interesting to me because he told Marchand they're out of ideas, or at the very least, nobody is in the business of coming up with new ideas. And you could say what you want about ESPN, but for the majority of its existence, it was a fairly visionary company when it came to content. They took a lot of chances that didn't necessarily work, writes Brandon Clean. Now, when the games aren't on, ESPN is largely overtaken by former athletes. While Bomani Jones would acknowledge the push for the company to conduct capital J journalism and how it may be overblown, he believes the network's perspective is far more informal and positive than it once was. Jones would go on to say, quote, "What I think is different is the shoulder programming around the live events feels much more geared toward promoting the live events than discussing them, critiquing them, so forth and so on. I think the part that jumps out to people now is that symbiosis feels a bit more transparent, perhaps, than it did before." Here's how I look at this, and I agree with Bomani 110%. What I would add is that it goes hand in hand with where sports media is currently right now. The dream was to be with ESPN. I'm sure for many it still is. But for a lot of folks in sports media, what they see now is going the podcast route, being their own boss, not having to go to ESPN to get your name out. It is all about, in a way, a strong social media presence while getting really good interviews and also just being interesting. That's something that he touched on as well. Like, the point of entry in media is so easy these days. All you really need is your phone. That's it. If you want to have headphones that come with it, with the little microphone that even I use for TikToks, like whatever. But for example, Theo Ash on TikTok just started talking about football because he's passionate about football. And now he got hired by a company. Kenny Beecham started out on YouTube and he built his name. And Stephen A. Smith promised him he would have a appearance on First Take. He has, I believe, been on the NBA on TNT. Like, I agree with him completely that this was a network where you became a star and then you did other things when you left, like a Dan Patrick, like, I know, love him or hate him, Keith Olbermann. It's true. Rich Eisen, Colin Cowherd, like many others. They used ESPN as a springboard. And now it really does feel like it's just watered down. And we're also getting our sports analysis, good reads, takes, etc., outside of ESPN because the entire hot take machine has been watered down as well. Think about what we had, and I talk about this a lot, but we had Outside the Lines, we had E60, we had the sports reporters. I mean, you had Sports Center with SVP and Stuart Scott, RIP. And now you have like these podcasts to fill time. And you have other shows to fill time. But it just doesn't feel the same. It really doesn't. It felt like we had, I know everyone says this of like their childhood adjacent era of like whatever it might be, but that was the golden years of ESPN. And now I really don't recognize it that much at all. But again, there are many things at play here. It is the cord cutting. It is a lot of people just not even caring to watch ESPN. It's a lot of people who would rather hear their sports analysis and opinions from podcasts. A lot of folks have less time. That's a political move. They also are making less, so they're not necessarily paying for an ESPN subscription. And I would argue that if it wasn't for the deals that they have with different sports around Monday Night Football, the NHL, NBA, Major League Baseball, etc., college football, obviously, and college basketball, I don't know what the network would be at this point, because those numbers for those shows are not high. They're really not. And as much as we criticize Stephen A. Smith and Pat McAfee, I would also make the case that ESPN had to do it. We can go over their analysis, their takes, and we could fact check them. And I think that's totally fair game. But I would say that ESPN cutting a bunch of people and then throwing the bag at Pat McAfee and Stephen A. Smith is realizing that it might be somewhat of a sinking ship, but in many ways you are getting more water out than is coming in at this moment with those two people being signed. If you can and are willing, please become a paid member here at TYT Sports. And or go to tyt.com/join. In addition, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Appreciate it. Have a great day.